Hello! Welcome back to D20 Sundays. My name is Ian, the part-time Dungeon Master. I will be your host as always. I would like to first thank Kristen at the It Parade now on Twitter, who sent me this book at the request of Shiloh, or at Lunalith on Twitter, who essentially nominated me to have a D&D gift, and I am pleasantly surprised they actually sent this to me because it's a $50 book. But it has definitely been helpful to me as far as creating more in-depth parts of this Riskin campaign for future sessions and possibly future campaigns. I wanted to talk about two major things for this episode. The first one being player versus player, when it's acceptable and when it is not. Which it seems like it's a very common thing in Dungeons and Dragons. I know ideas and personalities clash and so on. I can fully understand that. But as far as to when player versus player combat is appropriate and necessary, it's normally rare. If you were playing in an arena-based campaign where the players regularly do battle with each other, that's one thing. If you're running a normal campaign in the sense that, you guys have a goal and so on, and the players scuffle or argue about something, that's less okay. Full out drawing weapons to try and kill the other player, that's not okay. Certain circumstances make it okay, but for the most part, it is not okay. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. I've seen in a few campaigns recently where the players flat out attacked the other player, in character of course, because they as a character or they as a player did not agree with what the other character or the other player was doing. And in some cases the DM handled it well, in others not so much. In one such case, the Dungeon Master was like, "Hey, no, we're not doing that. We're not having any of that. That's stopping right now." And he explained, "We're not doing this because, one, compared to your guys' alignments, compared to what your backstories and such, it makes no sense for either of you to be doing this. No matter how much it makes you dislike him, the fact is you guys have been traveling on the road together for 6 months now, and you know each other very well. This is not something you guys would do." On the other hand, the Dungeon Master allowed the players to fight, and one or two of them died because, first it was a one-on-one, but then people took sides, and, it essentially caused the death of the party. And what I mean by that is someone died, and now the party can't look each other in the eye. And it happens. When your players argue, when your characters fight and argue and cause a schism or a rift between each other, that's not going to be just patched up over the next session or, glossed over the next days. No. Characters should be played as if they're real people, and therefore it's going to be a while before, that schism gets, healed. Especially if the two people have a very abrasive attitude towards each other. So, in the case that I brought up as far as, the players, and actually one of them dying, two of the players were fighting. They apparently argued enough to where one of them finally got tired and drew his sword and attacked the other, and they started fighting. When the other party members, saw them, they ran over to try and stop them, and, they broke them up, and then all of a sudden they started taking sides, and then they started fighting more, and then finally one of the original two that were fighting dies, and they had no means of bringing him back. They had no means whatsoever of reviving him. They didn't have the money, and they didn't have the spells, they had nothing to bring him back. His character was dead. And from watching this campaign, because I've been, sitting on the sidelines kind of as a co-DM for about 2 months now, and they've been playing almost every other week, every weekend to every other weekend, sometimes twice a week. So I wasn't there for every session, but I was there for enough of the sessions to understand that there was a lot of dedication put into each one of these characters. There's a lot of stories still written for each one of them. And the Dungeon Master sat there and allowed the player to kill the other player. And I don't think that was handled correctly. Because that means that player, all the work he had put into that character, was irrelevant now. It was gone. The campaign part that was based around him was pointless. The whole story that was essentially going to be his character growth was gone. That character was dead. And the Dungeon Master had him roll up a new one. But here was the other problem. A player killed another player. The characters that were still alive, left. They went their separate ways because there was no way they were going to travel with someone who would kill another one of their party members, someone that they were supposed to be allies and comrades with. They weren't going to travel with him. There's no way he was going to do that. And they couldn't look each other in the eye that well because they knew, because they took sides, that they allowed it to happen. That they allowed the character to die, that they allowed everything to happen, and therefore it was their fault. So they went their separate ways. And now the DM's kind of upset because, well, he had a lot more planned, but all the characters that are relevant to the plot are gone. They don't want... The characters themselves wandered off. One of them left like the midst of the morning after the night watch, woke everyone up, told them that he was leaving and that he will most likely never see them again. And he left. Another one left as soon as they got to town. He was like, I'm parting ways, I'm going to the east. I know we were originally all going to the north, but I'm not doing that anymore. One of them sat down in town and said, I'm retiring. I'm not doing this anymore. And one by one, in a single session, every character dropped out. That is the downside to player versus player, if it is not handled correctly. And even then, handling it correctly in a normal campaign to where you have a main goal and the players start fighting and arguing, that is difficult on its own. So you try and steer them away from it and try and keep them on track. Now, that being said, in the Pathfinder campaign I was in, Oric, the scout, and Tau of the Untwisting Iron, the monk, didn't really get along. Mostly because Tau didn't trust Oric, because Oric had the ability to just vanish. He was gone. He'd appear somewhere else in the battlefield, backstab someone, and then, move on with his life. He didn't trust Oric because Oric constantly hid his face, never really told anything about his past, and never really shared his true intentions with the rest of the party, but he was always there with the party and always willing to back them up. But Tau didn't trust him because he wore a mask, he lies, and he constantly disappeared in battle. He didn't know what time it was going to be that Oric disappears and does not return. Which I, as a player, can kind of get. I can understand that. Oric, on the other hand, is like, look, I'm not going to leave you guys high and dry in battle unless it's an absolutely hopeless fight. And even then, I'll probably still try my best to help before I dip out. Tau, on the other hand, was a very upfront, abrasive person. It's like, no, you fight up front. You fight where everyone can see you so we know that you have our back. And Oric's like, no, I'm not doing that. That's not how I work. That's not how I work, because the way I work gets me into position, helps set everything else up for everyone else, and it ends the battles quicker. I'm not going to be in front fighting face to face with some fucking dragon when I know for a fact the dragon can kill me very quickly, but if I'm behind the dragon, I'm going to be ruining its day. But that was a difference in characters. Did they ever come to blows? No, thankfully. Sure, in one of the campaigns that I wrote, they eventually did because, their disagreements became too heavy. But as far as in the campaign itself, Tao regularly tried to intimidate my character and one of the other characters into doing things his way. And the Dungeon Master, he let it pass for the first 2 times, but then after he was like, no, this is not happening. Which is another thing as far as player versus player, and the second major thing I wanted to bring up, which is using skill checks to intimidate other players into doing what you want them to do. Yes, it is technically allowed. No, you should not do it. I had this problem also with Steve in the original campaign. He tried to cow other players into doing what he wanted by intimidating them. I've seen this in a couple other campaigns as well, but it is generally frowned upon. Not only by the players, because you're forcing their character to do something they don't want you to do, or they don't want their characters to do, but also it's frowned as far as a DM goes because you are taking choices away. And DMs get enough crap when it comes to, oh, you took away my choice and just railroaded me. We get enough crap for that. We don't want other players doing that to other players because then the players are going to look at us as like, well, why aren't you stopping this? Sorry? So generally, in most cases, the rule is you are not allowed to intimidate your fellow party members. And if you are, it's never to be like forcing them to make a choice that you want them to do. It's like very rarely is it allowed, and only under certain circumstances is it allowed. But once again, I have seen the downside of essentially a dungeon master allowing their players to do whatever. So one of the players was intimidating another one, constantly threatening him, ordering him around. And he's like, well, my guy's a former quartermaster. He was a soldier. This is how he does things. This is how he gives commands. He expects soldiers out of his party members. And it's like, yes, but your party members are not soldiers. One was a blacksmith. The other one is a clergy member. And the last one is literally a guy who lived in the woods for nearly 20 years. These are not soldiers. These are your friends. And you're sitting here ordering them around as if they were soldiers and essentially treating them like machines. But that's how he did things. And the DM allowed it to go on for a long period of time until finally one of the players just said, no, my character leaves the party. And as soon as he did, the other two were like, yeah, we're gone too. And the dungeon master was like, okay, where are you going? And they said, anywhere but here. We're going anywhere else. The 3 players then turned around and derailed the entire campaign. Ruined, apparently, so much of the dungeon master's writing and what he had prepared and everything. And just completely derailed everything. And the one player continued to try and intimidate them. And the players decided, no matter what he rolled, they are not doing it anymore. Because they were tired of this one player constantly using his character to order and boss theirs around. And they ended up just like, look, either we're doing it our way or we walk from the table. And honestly, I kind of agree with that. Because if the dungeon master is forcing things upon you, that's not really a fun campaign. And especially not a fun campaign if another player is forcing things upon you and the dungeon master is just sitting there allowing it. But yeah, so that's what I kind of wanted to bring forward to you guys on this D20 Sundays is, player versus player, when it's acceptable and when it's most certainly not, and intimidation and forcing your fellow party members to do things that they as a character or they as a player do not want their character doing. There's some things that I never want my characters doing. Rape being one of them. That's a big no. Another one is essentially burning people alive when they are innocent. It's not something I want my character ever doing. Yet there has come situations in past campaigns where someone's like, you set that person on fire or I will hurt you. no, I'm not doing it. And thank God the rape one has never happened. Because this is slightly sidetracked, but this is from a Reddit post from some time back that I commented on about a player playing a character with the history of being sexually abused and so on. It's not okay. I don't include it in my writings. I don't include it in my campaigns. I don't include it in my characters and so on, because it is not something that I find acceptable. We use Dungeons and Dragons as an escape and as an adventure away from real life things. Sure, these things may actually exist in your campaign world. They might actually exist in that time period. But the fact is, it's not something we want to write about. It's not something we enjoy doing in Dungeons and Dragons. If that's what you want to do as a character and as a player in Dungeons and Dragons, good, fine. Go find a group that does that as well. You bring in one of my sessions, I don't care if I'm the player or if I'm the Dungeon Master, I will either boot you out or make your character's life a living hell before I leave the table. Just saying that. It's not acceptable. Ever. And just like rape is never acceptable, it is never acceptable on the table, and neither is forcing your fellow party members through intimidation checks to do things that they don't want to do, or even attacking your fellow party members and trying to kill their characters for regardless the reason, unless they have completely turned evil and you have to destroy all evil because it's part of the plot. Anyways, got a little sidetracked there. Sorry about that. I'll catch you guys in the next D20 Sundays and the next DM's Corner, which, if everything goes correctly, will be broadcasted out over Twitch. And you can find me at Twitch at Ian the Part-Time DM, and always on Twitter at IMCMINN08, and as well as here. Thank you for joining me.